Brand new episode of Full Metal RPG, episode 113. I'm your host, Brendan Carrion. Today I'm joined by my friend, my partner, Richie motherfucking Buzzkill. What up, playa? How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Just it's been a long time since we've done this kind of episode, so I'm not sure we know how to do them anymore.
What kind of episode is that?
A normal episode. A normal
episode?
Normal
Has it been that long?
It's been like a month and a half since we did a normal episode.
Has it really? Holy fucking shit. All right. It just seems like yesterday to me. We've been doing a lot of eps.
That's true. You've been doing multiple eps.
Ranch.
Many eps.
Lots of eps. All right. So we got Darrell. What up, playa? How you doing?
I'm good. It's an exciting day. It's good to record this weekend. The house is quiet. I got new space to sit and record in, so I'm not just locked in my bedroom trying to hope that the kids won't wreck my recording. So it's good. I'm having a good day.
Awesome. And today we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Seattle, Washington, is friend of the show, Spencer Kelty. What up, playa? How you doing?
Hey, everyone. Glad to be here. Really excited to join in. I've been listening for a long time, so thanks for having me.
Long-time listener, first-time guest. You got a little project on Kickstarter right now, is that right?
I do. So right now I've got the Bleakness on Kickstarter. It's a rules light horror RPG. It's kind of a system-setting campaign all rolled into one. I'm doing that through my own publishing label, Twisted Image, and Exalted Funeral. Matt's been absolutely amazing to work with, and we've just been doing great. We just passed our funding goal about 10 minutes ago, too. So,
congratulations!
Thanks.
Nice.
Congratulations. Nice. And so we have kind of a special subject. We thought we'd have Spencer on to talk a little bit of OSR. Today, because your project exists in an OSR type space, is that right?
Yeah, I try not to identify my projects by OSR these days. I think that the space is kind of the indie RPG space has kind of transcended the OSR label to a certain extent. So, is it OSR? Yeah, it's OSR adjacent, but yeah, I mean, it's gotten to be such a huge space with so many different creators doing, really different stuff that I think I think it's so much bigger than that these days. If that makes any sense.
See, and that's exactly what we're here to discuss today, which is great. So it actually works out perfectly. That's awesome. For a long time, I think your Instagram handle was like Kelty OSR, right?
Yeah, it's actually really funny, and that stems from. Well, it's my Facebook handle for my writing. It stems from Facebook's bizarre rules that I can't put a initial as my first name.
Nice.
So that's basically me just trying to figure out a way to do to navigate Facebook's weird rules.
I love Facebook's totalitarian reveal your identity to us, citizen algorithm. That's super great. That's definitely the internet I was promised. Anyway, so yeah, we have a lot to discuss today, and we're very excited to get right to it. Let's go ahead and do some shout-outs, huh? What do you guys think? You want to do some shout-outs? We have had so much activity in our Patreon community, and we've been kind of like out doing cyberpunk characters and shit, and so we haven't had a real opportunity to shout out to some cyberpunk patron types, and so now we're going to go ahead and do it. So I'm just going to start at the top. I'm going to go ahead and read it down. I wanted to say thank you to our friend Xander, who came in hot for the show. We got Mr. Tepes. Thank you so much for your pledge. We really appreciate you. Then we go back down to our homie Patrick. Hit us up. If you're ever on our Discord community, come find our friend Kirby. He's like on our Discord all the time. He came in hot, big pledge. Our friend Alberto, who longtime listeners of the show will totally know Alberto. If you're a friend of ours from Instagram, you'll know Alberto, 5 to midnight. he is kind of trying to show up on our Discord community now too. So if you want to interact with him, come down, hang out. Our friend Woodfin hit us up
Hell
for
yeah,
some
Woodfin.
Patreon
What up?
love. Yeah, that's one of the RBK crew. What up, playa? Our good friend Casey showed up. We haven't seen Casey in a hot minute. It's been a while. It's nice to know we're still on Casey's radar. Hope you're doing well out there, man. Our friend David hit us up on Patreon. Thank you so much. David's also very active on our Discord. So if you want to come down, rap about RPGs with David, please do. Our good friend Wolfmungus, always in our thoughts.
Wolfmungus.
Fucking, dude, he's like a titan of the fucking Full Metal RPG cult. That guy, he's like cultist number one. You know what I'm saying? First among equals. He upped his pledge. Just throwing it out there. He just dinked it up just a little bit. Our friend Paul, who was on the show when we were doing our characters and stuff. At this point, I think all of our hosts pledged the show. We just it's all just like a thing that we do because again, there's a lot that needs to get done around the show, and we can't just if we're going to ask for altruism from others, then we should do altruism ourselves. And like we believe in the show just as much as anybody who pledges to the show believes in it. So thank you to Paul for pledging. My good friend Brenton has pledged, and I think that we might have covered this one before. Does this sound familiar to you, RBK? What do you think? Does this sound familiar? I don't know.
I mean,
Brenton.
It's always good to shout out Brenton.
Yeah, I love Brenton. And dude, thank you so much for pledging the show. And then we have our friend Drew Bagley went ahead and pledged the show. And you might know him from Instagram. He is actually building a RPG that sounds kind of like Star Trek based, Star Trek adjacent. And he actually wrote me a really, I thought, like touching note about his relationship to the show. And I actually wanted to read it today on the show, but it is lost in some strange place in the internet. Like I can't find it via Patreon. So I'm sure he sent it via Patreon, but I can't find it via Patreon. So I don't know where that note went. And maybe if I find it, we'll share it with you next time. So those are all our new patrons. Thank you so much for making the show possible. If you are on Discord, please come and join us on Discord where we can go ahead and up your privileges so you can get all the stuff that patrons get on Discord. And if you're just a listener and you're looking for a cool RPG community where you can come hang out with like-minded people, talk about obscure games, drop hot takes, mix it up a little bit, maybe even find a game with some new friends, then find us on Discord. We have links in fullmetalrpg.com on our link tree and on our Facebook page. It's very easy to get an invite, very easy to get onto that incredibly supportive and communicative community. So before we move on to the black hole, and I know everybody is just super stoked to hear the black hole, right? I thought I'd read some iTunes reviews. What do you guys think? You guys want to hear some iTunes reviews?
Of course. I'm always up for iTunes reviews. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Exactly. We asked for some iTunes reviews, and we got some. And it's nice to get the reviews. I like getting reviews. Even the bad ones. The bad ones are also good ones, ironically, sort of strangely. All right, so March 16th, our friend Slow Travel left a 5-star review saying,
"Thank you very much.
FMRPG is top-tier podcasting. No lazy filler episodes. Every episode is thoughtful and absorbing. It's like sitting in on a really substantive conversation with friends. Highly recommend. Great Discord community." Hey, so you heard it there from Slow Travel. Show up for the podcast. Stay for the Discord community. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Slow Travel, for your review and for your kind words. We really try. We really try. It means a lot that you said that. We got our good friend Haxmore. Haxmore's also left us a nice 5-star review. And they say, there are dozens and dozens of RPG podcasts out there that will give you, quote, 5 simple GMing tips, end quote, each week. FMRPG isn't one of those podcasts. If you are interested in stepping back and considering the bigger picture ideas like how society shapes games, shapes the games we play, and how the games we play reflect back that society to us, then you will find lots of thoughtful discussion here. It isn't all heavy philosophical and critical discussion, though. The hosts keep it light and enjoy talking about their favorite hobby together. And let me tell you that that's a huge confirmation of what it is that we're trying to do here, because anybody who's been with us for a while knows that the show has gone through a number of sort of like incarnations, like iterations, and that's the latest one, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited that we're kind of like really. I feel like we're really communicating to people with this. The last one actually goes all the way back to January 1st, and it's from our friend Susie on Memory Alpha, and she says, "This is a 5-star review." She says, "If thoughtful commentary on RPG systems is too much for you, crawl back into your troglodyte cave and find a different podcast that your limited brain can handle. This one isn't for you. This one is great with hosts who aren't afraid to touch on subjects that need to be talked about, whether about systems or the community." And Susie, thank you so much. We love you. We love Memory Alpha. We love what Memory Alpha stands for. And the people, including Ashley, are one of our co-hosts that is on that show. So we consider ourselves to be part of the Memory Alpha community, and we're very happy to have the Memory Alpha community be part of ours. If you listen to that show, you are always welcome here, and you're also always welcome on our Discord. So thank you so much for those reviews, and we always need more. We always need more. The Chuds are after our stars. Chuds want to steal our stars. Okay, guys? So if you want to give us some stars, go on to fucking iTunes and give us some stars and some nice words. We'll read them here, and we could really use your stars. So thank you so much to everybody and to all the patrons. And my God, you're probably fucking sick of hearing it from Brendan at this point. So let's get into the black hole.
The black hole.
The black hole is the ever-sucking void. It takes up all of our time, energy, and resources. It is role-playing. Greatest of hobbies. Spencer, my friend, we asked you to come on the show, and you've been sitting there so patiently while I have monologued. What's going on with you, man? What hobby interests are you pursuing?
Yeah, so I've had a game going now for I think we're almost to like 8-9 months now, which so nice long game. Running it kind of using a kind of hacked version of LOTFP with some other rules thrown into there. Just kind of running through some kind of historical setting stuff.
What historical setting?
So it's kind of the standard like English Civil War type kind of period, 1630s into there. But it's gone off the rails there. They've went into another reality at this point. So, as all good campaigns do. So that's been really awesome. That's been my weekly game. I'm actually about ready to start playing a story game called Alice is Missing that I've had on my shelf now for a while. So I'm actually
This is the game you play via cell phone, is that correct?
Yeah. Yep. So kind of while my Kickstarter's going, I realized, man, I'm just too tapped to run a weekly game now. So I'm like, all right, let's do something that's a little bit lower maintenance, and let's go and play this fun story game in the meantime. So I think we're getting that started this week over cell phone, and just going to have that run for the next couple of weeks.
So does that game run? I think I've asked a couple of people, but I've never really heard the answer. But at least not that I can remember. Does that game run where you're all in the same room and you're playing on cell phones together, or do you play it by cell phones separately and not necessarily on a game day, but just like when you can play it?
Now, I wish I could give you a better answer than this because I haven't read the rules fully. I think it's designed to do either. I get the feeling that it could be kind of one of those kind of almost party games. But I don't think it really matters too much. How I'm planning on doing it is kind of scheduling some times where it's like, Tuesdays, 7 to 8 p.m. We're just going to kind of have your phone on you, make sure you're paying attention and replying, things like that. But I think it's really designed very nicely so that you can do it in different ways. I mean, it's a GM-less system, so it's not like there's one person that doesn't get to play. It's, as long as one person has the actual game and is running through the kind of event cards, I think it's really flexible, which is kind of what drew me to it.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I hope that goes well. That game fascinates me. I don't think it's a thing I would do personally, but I find it fascinating because I think it's a new frontier in gameplay. Darrell, man, I don't think you've had a real good opportunity to talk yet. What about you? What are you up to?
So lots of life has just kind of got in my way. I'm actually crawling out of my big black depression of void and coming back to the world. Ashley and I have been talking about doing the Ironsworn RPG. I started reading it. So I'm looking forward to that. We're going to give that a run and do some reviews or live plays or something to kind of bring the world of 2-player RPGs and more GM-less type games to the forefront. I just backed Solemn Veil because literally it popped up in my feed and I saw a pink cover and I'm like, I gotta have it. And then I saw it was Mark Kelly and I'm like, well, I gotta have it. So, and it comes with a lot of cool Kickstarter editions. So I'm definitely on board with that. I love horror games. So those are the two big things I got going on right now, other than rearranging and continuing to collect books. So
always fun. Those are always fun
and
pastimes.
with the end of our COVID era in sight, the light at the end of the tunnel, I was talking with Ashley last night about writing some convention games and starting to make sure that I'm prepared so we can get back to the tables. I have some ideas ready to go.
Yeah.
So I've still got 5 of the Chronicles of Darkness first edition games to run to just check off the list. So that's what I've been up to.
Nice. I think I'm going to take the opportunity to segue off of it because then I won't have to go directly into explaining the subject. But as you said, the COVID era seems to, on some level, be drawing to a close, at least its current incarnation, which with the advent of vaccinations, #vaccinations save lives, seems like we may see resurgence of the potential for in-person gaming. And I'm taking the opportunity for in-person gaming to mean Mage the Ascension. Oh my god, look at this shit.
Look at that book.
Oh my god, so big. Oh my god.
That is literally has an armor rating.
Yeah. This thing is something fucking else. Yeah, so this is the 20th anniversary edition. I picked it up from Drive-Thru, and I was like, I was just in this mood. You can ask my Dungeon Punks friends. I was just in this mood. I was like flirting with GURPS. I was like, just wanted like a really crunchy like game that I could play, then really just sink my teeth into and get into like a bunch of source books and shit. And then you know how they got me? They got me with that fucking Victorian age mage Indiegogo. I was like, fuck, oh, that's so cool. They're actually going to flesh out this era. And so I went on there and I was like, I mean, the thing is I haven't really played Mage. I haven't played Mage since the 90s, but I never stopped watching it. Like, I had a complete collection of Revised Edition Mage. And then our friend of the show, Joseph Aleo, he does Mage the Podcast. And I listen to Mage the Podcast like fairly regularly, despite the fact that I don't play the game, just because I like to know what's going on in that game. And so I was like, you sons of bitches, you fucking got me. I gotta have the core book to run the Victorian game, even though it doesn't come out till July of 2023. So I fucking... this is literally the gamer logic I went through. I was like, well, I got my $75 for Victorian Mage, and if I just spend another $250, then I'll have everything. So I just bought everything. I just bought it all for 20th. And this game is so fucking good. This is by far the best of the 20th anniversary editions. It is a complete edition, all on its own. It's not just a list of powers. It's not just a list of references to other books. It's a completely new edition of Mage that brings the storyline and brings the concepts up to about 2014 when it was written. I cannot recommend this game highly enough. It's published by Drive-Thru, so the binding has already broken. Okay, it's a $100 book, and the binding's gonna break it basically immediately. #Drive-Thru sucks. But you gotta buy this book. This is such a great fucking game. I can't wait to get to the table. Richard, I think, might be playing in my game. We'll see. I'm really hoping so.
I'm very excited about the idea of this. So I'm gonna see what I can get things working in that direction. So,
and I also am gonna get things working in that direction. So that's where my mind is at in the black hole. Mage the Ascension has been eating up my dreams. Richard, what do you got going on, bro?
Man. And this is why I got to get things working, because I got a lot of shit going on. So I'm not only so we finished Eternal Lies, right? This is how long it's been. It's been like a month and a half. We finished Eternal Lies, which Paul has said he'd like to do a debrief, a recap, have a conversation about that, whether we pull him onto a regular show here in the next little bit, like next month or whatever, or just have like a little bonus content where he and I and maybe a couple other people sit down and just kind of hash out what happened in the campaign and what our feelings about Eternal Lies ended up being. So be on the lookout for maybe some of that if we can squeeze into our tight schedule.
Oh, I hope we're able to find the room for that, because that sounds amazing. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think we do. And then, so after that was over, Nolan stepped up, and we're now playing 13th Age. It's a short mini campaign, 3, 4, 5 episodes, whatever. We'll see where that goes. But I have, of course, because I didn't really want to think about it too hard, I went with my first character idea, which is my one unique thing for my barbarian, is he has a replacement arm that is fueled by rage. So I've basically made a cyberpunk character in 13th Age. If not consistent with my
Is it a cyberpunk character, or is it a steampunk character, or is it
No, it's not a steampunk character, because I'm not carrying a giant boiler on my back. Like, it's just fueled by my emotion. So like,
is it rage punk? Is this the beginning of the rage punk
dash
movement?
punk, the continuous effervescent ever continuing conversation on our Discord of why does everything have to have dash punk at the end? Dash punk, and then there's now they were talking about punk and punk, and I was going to do punk by 4 and say that how all the other previous punks were selling out and we're not really giving anything. Speaking of punks, I did get a copy of my copy of Tomb Punk in. Alan Barr wrote it as like, he literally said, I had to get this out of my head. It's not good or tested. I just had to get this out of my head. So like, I think it's better than he gives it credit for. So, and somebody else published it. Outland Entertainment published it. So it's not cool. Yeah. So, and that was my light hitting the ground. Fun times. And then I also started with some of my college friends another online game where I'm playing Eberron on Fridays.
Wow! Which version?
The newest version, 5th Ed. The new version of Eberron. Yeah. So I'm playing an alchemist in Eberron right now, and we've got a mission from a wizard, and we're off wandering through the mountains and got attacked by wolves. So,
oh man, I have a real soft spot for Eberron. I feel like Eberron got a real raw deal with the changeover from 3.5 into just other stuff. I think, man, I love me some fucking Eberron, bro. Anyway, enough of that.
Yeah, and it's been fun so far. We're just kind of getting some short sessions on Fridays going for that. So
fucking cool, dude. I can't wait to hear more about that.
And then I got one more thing I have to talk about.
Turn into a regular Ashley over here, bro.
Well, it's been a month and a half since I've been to the black hole. It's important for me to testify, and Wolfmungus ran a Soulbound game for one shot, and I got to play in it. While I am not an Age of Sigmar stan, as everyone seems to be that is anywhere near it, I thought it was pretty fun. I thought it was a pretty good game. Wolfmungus did a great job GMing for something that seemed to be a very nebulous written adventure that he was running. So it reminded me a lot of kind of Exalted without kind of the bad pretense. Like there was definitely like you could feel like describing things in much more over the top method, because a lot of what you were doing as characters, a lot of your moves and stuff were bigger in nature than you get from like say a D&D. So like I feel like if you wanted more of that like power fantasy thing that D&D does, okay, not great, until you get to higher levels, I think Soulbound might be your game. So
Cool.
So.
Cool, great. All right, well then, on to the topic at hand. So today we have come together to talk about kind of exactly what Spencer was sort of introducing as an idea, which is that there's like an urge kind of in the RPG space to it's a nerdish urge. Let's just put that out there. It's a nerdish urge, and we're nerds, so can't really hate ourselves too much for doing it. But it's kind of like the old music nerd thing where we gotta start putting things into their tracks. We gotta start sorting, right? Like genus, order, phylum. What is this game? And we've heard a bunch of different words used to describe these ideas over the last few years. One of the words that's really caught on in the world is OSR, which means old school role playing. And there's like this whole body of work that has generated behind OSR over the past 10 years, and a whole kind of cast of characters whose political views have kind of come in and out of that OSR space. Then we also have sort of what has been presented to us as the contra to OSR, which is the story game or the narrative game. And even then, the story game and the narrative game are like very nebulous concepts. So, like, I mean, I'm pretty sure that the writers of the original White Wolf games would say, "Oh, of course, our games are story games. They were designed to be story games." Yet, what makes them not story games? I think there's plenty of people who play story games who would say that the old World of Darkness games are not story games; they're trad games. So, who is the one who gets to say what these games are? But these two cultures of the OSR game and of the narrative game have been kind of like. There was this kind of fake idea, I think, for a long time that they were somehow opposed. They were these mutually opposed schools. But the deeper we get into both experiences, I think the more we're realizing that they're really almost the same. It's just that they have different approaches to the same problems. So we wanted to kind of talk about that. We wanted to kind of explore some of these ideas. So I'll yield the floor. Who wants to kind of get started on breaking some of that open? I think, hey, Spencer, how about you? What are some of you got some hot takes on this, man?
Yeah, I think I do. So I think that, for one, like you nailed, the definition's really kind of impossible to nail down. Everyone's going to give you a different answer. I think there's some things that everyone can agree on, that games like, Fiasco, for example, like that, everyone's going to agree that's a story game, things like that. But, I would say that you kind of have to bring it down to the central gameplay loop, which is more of a concept that's better defined in video games than in tabletop games. But I think that if you look close enough, most games in tabletop have a central gameplay loop as well. Traditional D&D type games, it's, you're looking for a quest. Once you have that quest, it's going to take you to a location where you're going to go systematically through areas, doing a certain procedure. It depends on the game, whether that is looking for hidden things, whether that's fighting enemies. That gameplay loop differs a little bit from each game. I would think I would posit that the line where you have OSR or traditional games versus a story game would be if that gameplay loop is story driven or mechanics driven. Because even when you go to the furthest reaches of rules light, I think that still makes sense. Like even in a game like Morkborg, for example, where if you got rid of all the fancy graphics, there's 3 pages of rules. There's still going to be central gameplay loops that involve mechanics where you're rolling to do things and that sort of thing, that are putting the narrative secondary to the mechanic loop, if that makes sense.
You see, I hear this a lot. People often say this to me, and my immediate retort is, well, what about PBTA? PBTA basically says the moves snowball. So you actually can't. The idea of the story is that the mechanic generates the story, right? Where you come in on that full success, partial success, success with consequence kind of thing, that is this intrinsic mover of the narrative itself. Yet I don't think anybody in the PBTA space would suggest that the PBTA games are not story games. I think a lot of people actually hold them up as being sort of good or bad, kind of like the epicenter of what's going on with story games right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Powered by the Apocalypse is kind of the mecca of all of that, at least currently. And I would just say that, you know, I think that in that case, there is definitely a gameplay loop and there are mechanics, but the mechanics are to facilitate the story, like you said, rather than to facilitate a challenge necessarily, or it's a blurry line. I mean,
or a simulation. It's like the line is almost weirdly like the simulation of what is happening in the moment versus the simulation of a genre of story, right? So like PBTA, a lot of them have diverged into this like very much like a simulation of a genre of story, where OSR and a lot of traditional games are very much about a simulation of the world. And then that hopefully there is a emergent, I'm getting a face from Pendants. He's like, a simulation of action that will hopefully generate disconnected events that will become a story in your mind. That a lot of times that like that's what happens in traditional games is it's almost like there's these disconnected events that we will then put a story around.
Well, I mean, we're talking about like emergent storylines versus planned storylines, essentially. And I think that like emergent storytelling, this is one of the things where I look at the story game world and I look at the OSR world and I'm like, this is the same world. You guys just have two different approaches, because an OSR designer will tell you that like, it's not about character classes. It's not about powers. It's not about crazy backstories. It's about going out and doing stuff, and then the storyline is an emergent narrative. But then you go over to your PBTA GM, and they will tell you, oh, don't plan too much. Take some notes, because people are going to start making moves, and then that is going to determine the nature of the story going forward, right? And I'm like, well, isn't that the same thing? I mean, aren't these both the same thing? Like, how is it that they are considered to be on opposite ends of a spectrum? And maybe if they're not even on opposite ends of a spectrum, they're at least occupying different portions of like the same matrix.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
So I have to admit that I had a misconception about OSR until starting to think about the subject for this podcast. And what I'm hearing from everybody kind of confirms that, is that when I think OSR, when I thought OSR for like the past few years, listening to Richie and everybody talk about it, I was thinking in terms of mechanics, like how crunchy is it? Because my experiences with early D&D, like second edition, very crunchy and numbers based. But when I started to look at the definition from Wikipedia of what OSR is, the definition is that the general ethos of OSR style plays emphasizes spontaneous rulings from the referee over set rules found in the book. And kind of after doing some digging into that, the very definition of OSR seems to be more of a free-form storytelling format over, say, with like Advanced D&D, all the modules that came out that shoehorn you onto a set of rails that you're walking down, that you have decisions to make and some random outcomes from rolling dice. But for the most part, the story is there and you're just hitting the beats in the story as written. And so thinking back to like my earliest stuff, watching my sister prepare for her games, creating maps, creating stories on the fly, and then session to session creating that story, I never regarded that as an OSR style, but it dovetails into that storytelling element where are we doing a creating story with the character's actions impacting the story, or are we just walking through a story? Is this a reenactment of a story that, you know, if I put Tomb of Annihilation on the table for 10 different groups, they're all going to get the same outcomes. It's all going to go the same way. Whereas a different GM just making their own campaign is going to do it on their own. So, like going into this, I was like, OSR, no, I'm a storyteller. But I think we're all going to come out to the agreement that there are a lot of similarities there.
I think OSR is actually one of the more. I think OSR is a breath of fresh air in how liberating it is, and I think it's equally as liberating as when you sit down with your first story game, and your first story game is like take all those dumb rule books and like throw them out the window, And your OSR book will basically say the same thing, which is that here's the core roles, and you really should. Usually, you'll hear this in an OSR book. They'll say you really shouldn't use these roles too much. That's not universal, and I think that there's some room for interpretation. My friend Brenton, patron of the show, was actually kind of throwing that one at me. He was pointing out like how Mork Borg can actually take anything and turn it into a skill check because it's just difficulty class 12 skill check. So, for instance, if I'm like if I'm like having a rooftop chase scene, I can be like, okay, well, jumping from one roof to another is going to be difficulty class 12 strength check, right? And now all of a sudden, I've almost kind of like by making that ruling that you were talking about, Darrell, I've like almost made Mork Borg like very kind of system heavy because now what you roll on that check is really important, and it's a check you're only going to succeed on if you have a 0 modifier, which is very likely. You're going to only succeed on that roll 40% of the time. So, like, that kind of fucking sucks, right? You're like, your character's about to like have some severe like spinal difficulties in just a second here. How does that influence? Like, how does the call for the roll influence OSR, story game, or trad game, this weird triangle that we find ourselves in?
So I think I can get into that a little bit. So I mean, if you look at traditional games, which would be like 5e, 3.5, I think I wouldn't count 4 in that group necessarily. But,
4 is his own
spicy.
Weird thing.
That's spicy.
Yeah, exactly. I think that in traditional games, generally they try to provide rules for basically any action. It is rules over rulings as opposed to OSR, which is rulings over rules. It's trying to create a lot more structure. So I mean, in that case, there when you're trying to jump from roof to roof, there's a mechanic, and it'll tell you what that mechanic is, and there's a clear progression and flow there. And I think that when you get into OSR, it's a lot more up to the ref. It's really up to what they want to do with the game. And that's one thing that makes me love those types of games more, is it can be as heavy or light on the rules as you want it to be, depending on the way you do things. Like, as a ref, I tend towards somewhat more of a narrative perspective, which is, if it's reasonable for you to do it, I think you should succeed. Like if you are trying to make a jump from one roof to another that the average person could make, great. I'm not going to make you roll on that. You should be able to do that. I'm going to assume that you're somewhat competent. But another GM might do what you were saying if they're running Mork Borg and make you run a DC 12 check on that. And I mean, what we're kind of coming to here is that you're not just looking at what the system is, you're looking at the specific person running it. And you can talk about what the designer's intent was, but that only goes so far.
Yeah, I think designer's intent is not a motivation that we should overlook.
Yeah.
But I think also there is a concept that we should be looking at, which is the culture that surrounds the game. I mean, in early iterations of the White Wolf stuff, which ends up being very trad games, and they meet your definition, Spencer, of trad games, in that there are very specific rules outlined for very specific things. In the White Wolf games, they were called dramatic systems, and then I think that we really ended up hitting peak trad game in the 3.5 era. Like, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree that 4 isn't a trad game, but like, I think that if you were like to go into the platonic realms where like a trad game it lives, and you were to see it with your third eye, it would look a lot like 3.5. Yeah. Because I mean, this was like, I mean, this. Did you ever try to grapple anything? Which is like, shouldn't mean like if you're ever
try to grapple anything in any D&D? Jesus.
Yeah, but it was notoriously difficult in 3.5, and swimming itself was also like bizarrely difficult. It had there were just like columns of descriptions about like what the process was, requiring multiple die rolls and like an understanding of like the flow of the river and like who's grappling who and all this fuck. I mean, heaven forbid if you were trying to grapple someone in a river, you were completely fucked. You'd be there all night.
I want to write a game all about grappling people in rivers now. Anyways.
Well, I mean, did you see on our Discord, our friend Petrie posted up a game called Grapple, the role-playing game. And I mean, and he's a designer and he designs little one-page games. And I mean, to me, I thought that was hilarious because there were many instances of playing those old 3.0, 3.5 D20 OGL games where it just really did seem like it came down to like, all right, well, I guess we're going to grapple. You guys can all go get pizza and stuff. I'm going to sit here and grapple a crocodile. So I think you're right. Those specific interactions do end up defining like what the trad game is, but what are the cultures that spell out because and this is kind of goes back to the beginning of my point, which I very nearly lost. Like White Wolf would say right in the beginning, like, you just ignore all this shit. It's really more about the story. Just ignore all this shit. And so there was always this culture that was like at war with itself, even inside the White Wolf games of, do I ignore this shit or do I make you roll a bunch of dice? You know what I'm saying? And then, yeah, go ahead. Please react to me.
Well, Richard, you want to go?
Yeah, well, anyway, yeah, basically I think I kind of think we need a different dichotomy here than OSR and story and trad. I think trad is still okay. So I'm gonna do some reclassification. I'm gonna explain why. So hold on a second.
All right. You realize I'm gonna let you think for a second and do your reclassification. We're in the Forge right now, right?
Oh God! All right, sorry. I apologize, everyone. I'll back the fuck off. All right.
Are we rebuilding the Forge?
No. I just want to.
Simulation is narrative.
No. I just want to say that it's really what I would deem in most art forms the modern movement. Okay, OSR and story is a modern movement where so you had these initial games that were like the early, call it prehistory Bronze Era games, right? Which had a lot of freedom to them, but they were also somewhat difficult to fathom in the high Gygaxian that a lot of them were written in. So there's a lot of freedom there, but as time went on, everyone was like, oh, we need to be more and more simulationist or more traditional, I think, as things go on. And then White Wolf comes along and they kind of say, yeah, we're going to give you all this simulation stuff you're used to, but we're also going to tell you to ignore it if it is convenient for your story. And to me, that is where the branch of what I will call modern games, which is OSR and story games. OSR does this with the fact that, like, the GM is the ruler of that domain, right? They say what happens and when you roll a thing, okay? This is the branch that we'll call OSR. Where in story games, depending on your table, you can get into... everybody has some control over the story. They're very much... We changed the name of our story game channel to Narrative Control because I think that's a much better description of what story games are, is who has narrative control. And everyone around the table has much more narrative control in what we would call story games versus OSR, where players don't have a lot of story narrative control only over themselves. They can't tell you that there's going to be a goblin behind that door, and that would be my reclassification of this idea, and so it would get
you're kind of moving. Go ahead.
That's why I think you're right about OSR and story games being the same coin. It's That's just a part of a branch, and then that branch kind of forked into two styles.
You're kind of telling us that we need to take a step back and look at it not like a music genre, the way that music genres give birth to other music genres, and then you can kind of trace them back through these trees. But we almost need to look at it more like comic books, the way that comic book historians have kind of created these eras in which comic book creativity took on certain themes, and that they have like more in common with each other inside of those themes, even if they belong to radically disparate companies. than they did with comics of previous eras. So like we have like Golden Age, Silver Age comics, and then I guess we're calling them like Steel Age or something now. I don't know what they're calling the
movie age
stuff.
The movie age,
the maximalist image with the pockets and stuff age. I don't know what that's called.
The 90s, that's what that's called.
you would kind of like to go and do sort of a time-based analysis, which to be totally honest, I think that's pretty good. I think that's a lot better than what we've been doing, which is trying to parse into these subgenres, and I think that actually would serve our vocabulary for talking about games a lot better than some of the words that we have chosen to use already. Darrell, I feel like you want to say something and you haven't gotten a chance to say anything. Go ahead.
So Richie's kind of got my brain going here on how and why we classify games, and he said something that kind of pinged my brain, that I think we're trying to classify game systems as OSR versus story versus traditional. But I can say that because I run 50-50 between conventions and my home, that my GM style and the style of me and my groups changes depending on what my object is. So if I'm running at a convention, I'm running rules as written, trying to stick to the books, because I'm demoing a product and people who like the game are likely to go out and play it themselves and buy the books. So if I change a rule, if I change a ruling, if I don't look up the speed of a 1997 Toyota Land Cruiser and tell them the exact gallons of gas in the tank and things like that, going to a GURPS table, and they find out that that's part of it, they're going to be missing out on that part of the experience. But if in my home game, it's very much more the storytelling narrative style, where it's like, okay, what rules are serving my story, what rules are not? And it comes down to me as the GM choosing that style with the table and with the players. So I think that what you were saying about White Wolf kind of giving us permission to throw the rules out was a good, we with original Dungeons and Dragons, we're given an idea of what storytelling is, and then White Wolf gave us permission to deviate from those rules as written, and it gave us different styles. But thinking of it from that perspective, any game can fit into either category depending on how you want to play it. So,
well, I mean, that kind of goes back to my question about culture, because while White Wolf did give you the permission to throw out those rules, there were a lot of people who didn't, and then those groups started compounding. And by the time you get to those same warnings are in the front of any Games Workshop game, and then all the 3.5 books where they're like, if you don't like this rule, just don't use it. Just use the rules you want to use. But like, those games were like finely tuned machines that if you just start reaching in with your pliers and pulling out sprockets and throwing them over your shoulder, then everything changes. I mean, it's the same thing as kind of like if you're playing Cyberpunk and you're just like, we're going to have net runners, or we're not going to have net runners. Totally different game by making one choice. So, like, what are the cultures in gaming that create these incentives? Go ahead, Spencer. I'm sorry.
Well, and this is what I was thinking of a few minutes ago. I think that's kind of what it boils down to, is that it's less about the differences between the systems themselves and the rules. It's more about the culture that game comes out of and that rule system comes out of, and the culture it builds, not just what the creator intended, but the culture that builds around it and evolves. This is generalizations, but in general, I think that OSR games tend to be about the challenge, about the discovery, and less about, creating something or, for lack of a better word, doing cool things. The doing cool things crowd tends to more the traditional games, kind of the more power fantasy type games. And on the narrative, the story game side, it's about creating something. Most people, I think, would say that they're looking to experience interesting situations. They're looking to build characters. They're looking to have social interactions. Not to say that doesn't happen in other games, but I think that the biggest difference is going to be the outcome that people are looking for in those games. What are you trying to achieve? And there's exceptions to this, but I think that most more serious narrative games, at least more serious story games, generally you tend to see things like some level of plot armor. It's really hard to have character death, or at the very least, it's hard to have it if you don't want it to happen. a lot of the time it'll make it narrative in the way that if that's what you're aiming for, that's what you're driving towards, it can happen. I think like Monster Hearts is a great example. You can die, but you have to decide that you're really willing to do that. You know, you have to say, this is what I want for the narrative. I want to, go and do this selfless act that's probably going to end up killing me, things like that. When in more of an OSR game, there is more of a sense of cause and effect and somewhat realistic, depending on the game, consequences to actions and threat of injury and death.
So I know that you're running a LOTFP hack, and since we're talking about culture and we're kind of talking about this idea of consequence, James Ragey is known for his essay that kind of set the world of OSR ablaze, and really on some levels I think started this battle, this fight about what OSR means. And the title of his article is "I Hate Fun." What's your take on that? Is OSR antithetical to fun?
No.
What does that mean within the culture of OSR?
Well, I think that it means that different people have fun in different ways. I think that, and I would say also that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So when I'm playing a game, I can have fun through narrative games, and I do when I play them. But generally, when I'm looking to have fun in a game, I'm looking for something that I feel challenged by. I'm looking for something where when I hit a level, I level up to level 2 for my brand new character. I feel that I really achieved something because there was a very real chance that I didn't get there. If I didn't play smart, I didn't do the right things. I think that's something. I think Raji takes it a little too far. As he does with some things. I think that he's got a very set idea of what he thinks it should be, and I think the tone that he's trying to hit is a cool tone. I think that tone works for a lot of people. Whenever I run LOTFP, for example, I think I probably have a much lower character death rate than most. I'm a little bit more forgiving about it, because I think that it needs to be a balance. It's not any fun just grinding your players into the dirt. Most people don't enjoy that.
Well, I think one of the things that you're saying is that you're kind of alluding to this idea that story games lack challenge to the player, and I think that is somewhat. I mean, it very much, it depends on the player and whether or not you're going to get any challenge. You get to choose your challenge for your character, and I often really enjoy putting my characters through the most terrible parts of a story, right? And this is something that I think a lot of people don't see very often. That why would you choose to kill your character? This is one of these key questions, right? And I think it's one of the most interesting things about story games is choosing to kill your character off, and maybe in not the perfect story moment, but in this moment that will become the perfect story moment because of the aftermath. So I think both kinds of games we're talking about in this dichotomy can offer that challenge to you. And like 10 Candles is an amazingly challenging game, like crazy amounts of challenge to that game, but it's an emotional challenge and not a riddles and puzzles kind of challenge. It is more about this emotional health and trying to figure out like issues of these characters, rather than like, can I figure out how to not die while walking down a hallway from a trap? Right? That's a perfectly valid kind of challenge, and it's very interesting to face. But I think that not having the challenge is one of these mistakes that I think as you grow playing these story games, you'll start to realize, oh, I need to like really bring up the terrible things for my character. Like I somewhat like turn the screws on the character is the most interesting part of the story. So like I need to start bringing that to the forefront. So I think it's there. It's just it's a thing you have to kind of get into further. And it's the same thing with OSR. You have to learn more and more about how to deal with an OSR situation. And it's more about the player knowledge, knowing how to deal with things, and not necessarily the characters being, at least that's what I've been told. Is a lot of people talk about like, oh, my brain is being challenged, and not with the meta knowledge, only the knowledge my character has, but I have got this meta knowledge of all this OSR usage, all this play. I have to use all that to survive, get my character to survive, to get it to level 2. So.
Yeah, no, I totally hear that. And I think that you're right. I think that I tend to have a similar play style when I play story games as well. I'm not looking to win. I'm looking to create the most interesting scenario, which a lot of cases isn't good for my character. What I would just argue, though, is I don't think that most people play that way. And I think that generally, which I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that. Like, people can create the fun the way they want to play it. But I think that generally, if you walk in, to 10 story games, probably 8 or 9 of them, there's not really much threat of failure because the players aren't creating that sort of a narrative. So I think that totally depends on the player. I think that you're right.
This is really reminding me of a discussion I had with John Wick many years ago. He was developing a system around the idea that failure is what provides story, and so the difference between a couple of different types of systems would be whether or not failure is a choice or whether it's thrust upon you. Did the system cause you to fail? Like Dark Heresy, I've never gone back to that game because the system was brutal and unforgiving.
Well, you don't like 15% chance of doing anything?
Not when I've been training my entire life with my laser pistol and that I can't shoot anything with at 5 feet. No, I don't like playing a stormtrooper. But
I don't like playing a fascist, so there's that too.
Yeah. Teaching players to appreciate failure and embrace failure was one of the things that I loved about the PBTA systems and running them was, okay, yeah, it's kind of 50-50 in a lot of cases, but when you fail, you get to decide what that looks like, and trying to carrot and stick players into, okay, you tell me how you fail and we'll make it interesting. I think that Spencer, you've got some points that a lot of people don't embrace that, and they're like, oh, I fail by a small margin and accidentally lose my sword a foot away from me. I'll just have to pick it up next round. Versus I throw my sword, it embeds itself in the wall 10 feet away next to the king's head, and now I look like an idiot and I've embarrassed everybody. One of those generates story, the other generates an extra round of combat. So, choosing to fail, that making failure interesting and letting players know that it's okay to choose to fail, I think is a good hallmark of both storytelling and OSR. But keeping in mind that the system should not make that decision for you, in my experience. I played a game of Cyberpunk. The last Cyberpunk game I was in, it's, again, a brutal system, and turned a corner, got shot in the face, character dead. And it was one of those things that should have happened, and then we kind of retconned it at the last minute, and it became, well, but we can kind of make it work where you're not totally dead, you're just mostly dead, and it's like, that got a little weird too. So letting the GM, the story, kill players, to Richie's point, versus letting the rules just brutalize players to death, kind of changes the way that you think about story and OSR, I think.
Well, and I think that there is, in some, with some systems and some GMs in the OSR, there is an over-reliance on forcing the players to fail in one scenario or another. I think I tend a little bit towards the camp of, in any game, if the players fail, there should be a reason why. They should have not asked the right questions. They should have not been being as careful as they should have been, things like that. I personally hate the idea of somebody, losing their character that they've spent, hundreds of hours with, unless they actually made a mistake. They did something they shouldn't have done. And it could just be that mistake is going into combat with a clearly, more powerful foe than they are, or something like that. Like that's still a failure. Failure to ask the right questions before you got into combat. Stuff like that. With the culture, I don't think everyone is that careful, though. I think that there's an over tendency to just be difficult for the sake of difficulty.
I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because I was once running a trad game, and it was a very, very trad game. It was a 3.5 trad game, the most traddy of trad games. And I would have encounters of different levels all over the map. Right, and then if you walked into this is before I had ever even heard the words old school Renaissance. It was a long time ago. I was a young man and making a lot of mistakes as a GM. I don't think that this was one of them. I had a lot of different encounters that were different levels all over the map, and if you walked into one and you were kind of exploring it, then you were supposed to kind of like have use your character's eyeballs to assess the situation, right? And so these characters walked into a room, and then they decided to do the thing that characters do. And I was like, oh, okay, this beholder or whatever it is just kills you. It kills you all. Like, here I am. I'm rolling the dice. Look, you're all fucking dead, right? And then afterwards, I was taken aside by one of the players, and he was angry at me. And he was like, why would you put my character in that situation? And I was like, what do you mean, dude? Like, it's like a whole world. It's not like when you're first level, you're just going to walk around and you're only ever going to meet skeletons and fucking wolves, bro. There's like the beholders are still there. It's not like you don't ever meet a beholder before you fucking become like the level necessary to kill a beholder. And he goes, I should never encounter anything that my character can't defeat. If I don't have the potential to defeat that thing, I should never encounter it. And I was just like, I was gobsmacked. It never occurred to me that was even an idea. I came from a vampire background, so at that point, the idea of like you being like a fucking neonate who just stumbles into like an antediluvian fucking chamber or whatever, that was just considered to be part of the game. But again, the culture that this guy came from, which was heavily influenced by video games, I have to point out, in his world, it was unfair, and I had pulled this like dirty, mean trick on him, and I had killed his character because there should have been like a secret button somewhere in the world to let him, if you push the button, then a rock fell on the beholder and he wins or something. You see what I'm saying? How do you guys respond to that?
I think that unfortunately, if you pulled the majority of 5e players, and even earlier, if you pulled the majority of 3.5 players, and probably even 4th edition, but again, outlier. I think the majority of people that play those systems would probably agree with that guy.
Yeah, that boggles me. And that's to me one of the things that really drew me back into the fucking OSR. Because I was like, fuck yeah, man. Say we're playing Wolfherb or some shit, right? Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I'm a potato farmer, and you're a dirt farmer, and you're a rat puncher, and you're a jester. And we're walking through the woods, and we see a beast man. Right, and he's like standing there wearing his like leather armor, and he's like bronzed and oily.
Run immediately! Run right now!
Yeah. You guys might consider running. You might consider this as an opportunity to run. But this is not what you would call a balanced encounter for your characters. And your success is neither a matter of good die rolls or like clever role playing. It's like you are fucked if you choose to interact with this thing, and that is one of the things that I kind of like about the OSR. But I do feel like the OSR has brought that idea back, but it was dormant for so long that a lot of people don't understand how to interact with it. They've lost the skill set of interacting with it in that way. And they now respond to that in this like they're being punished, and that creates this culture war between people who say OSR is for hard men, and people who play story games are soft. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you guys have to say?
So the video game analogy, talking about somebody who comes from video game, I cut my teeth on Super Mario Brothers on the Nintendo. I introduced my kids to the Nintendo era, original NES, and they would play every game for approximately 15 seconds, and then they would throw it and get the next one and try it, and they couldn't handle it. They're like, this is hard. And I'm like, it is hard and unforgiving, man. We're Nintendo era. So talking about that kind of challenge, the idea that you shouldn't be challenged is challenging to me, because literally 5th edition has challenge ratings so that you can set it up theoretically and say, okay, this is an appropriate challenge for this group, for this many of this level of player. It gives you that mechanic to allow you to do that. But from my perspective and my background with the highly narrative games and whatnot, there's always another way around it. You know, you're talking about push the button that makes the rock fall. I am not going to give my players a button to do that, but if they can create some kind of situation to give themselves some kind of an advantage, that's what I'm in it for. And I'm not going to pull the punch. I'm not going to take the beholder away. I'm just going to say, you know, you see it, what do you do next? And if it's run away, then it's run away. And if we have this really crafty plan based on our skill level and our equipment, cool, let's try it. But I want that to be the player's choice. I just never want them to blindly walk into something terrible. And that's just my GM style, I think, is the clue by 4. I'm going to give you 3 different opportunities to know what you're walking into before you get there so that you can come up with some kind of plan to handle it. The Beastman is on the path, but you see him from a long ways away.
And I think one of those things that what we'll call trad games has done and made it extraordinarily hard to kill characters. Like, you look at Cyberpunk, we were talking about last week, it's really hard to kill a character in Cyberpunk right now, which is just disgusting to me. It's extraordinarily difficult to kill a character in 5th edition. Extraordinarily difficult to kill a character unless they take like massive damage, and there's some trad rule about that somewhere. But if you,
it's bell curve. It's bell curve.
But you have to pass all these death saves, right? You have a 50-50 death saves, and you have to fail it 3 times. The statistics on that is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's edge case if you die.
Right. A lot of these traditional games that kind of steer towards the power fantasy side, which is, let's be honest, the majority of what's popular in that style of gaming, it's really hard to kill a character. Like, it just is. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons that OSR feels so fresh when you first discover it when you only have played D&D. It's like, oh shit, I can actually die here. I feel in danger. Like, this adds to my level of immersion. It's the same thing with a story game. Like, oh, I'm in complete control of everything. You know, if I want to be, if we all collaboratively want who's in control, who's narrative control, that's incredibly refreshing. So, but and that. I just kind of everybody keeps coming back to the word culture, like keep talking about culture. And this is one of those things where I think one of the reasons OSR turns, and I'm going to go into a little bit politics and role playing, the culture of our OSR has been somewhat recovering from a very kind of toxic situation for a long time, and I'm glad that, like, Morkborg and there's a few other more modern OSR games that have kind of tried to eschew, because OSR, because it was like supposed to be old school, attracted a lot of people that were very much into an old school political philosophies, and this is what kind of turned off a lot of people to the OSR. I still get some of this from even some people that are hardcore role players. Like, they don't know that there are games that aren't, the white supremacist OSR game that I'm not going to say the name of, but like, this and where, a lot of people call story games the crunchy granola hippie bullshit. So like, it's this weird, like, the cultures have kind of, even though they're, we play hardcore, like, really, dark and frightening story games, and we've also played kind of, very somewhat hippie based OSR stuff. Like, it's the perception of these communities has been somewhat what's fractured this idea of what I'm going to call modern gaming, modern RPGs. So.
And that's exactly why what I said about earlier when I introed, the bleakness, is that's why I don't use the OSR term. It's like, does it fit the definition? Sure. But I think there is a problem there. And I think that one of the issues is I'm a little biased here as somebody who's been in the OSR for almost a decade. I think that we have some of the best, the majority of the best creators in RPGs right now that write mostly in the OSR space, or at the very least, the ones that are the most creative and the most kind of pushing the envelope on what's happening. And I think that, the more that is kept in that old OSR, the more that we stay in that old OSR headspace and encourage those types of viewpoints, the less likely we are to have new people come in from traditional gaming spaces. From my own experiences, almost everyone that I play with on a regular basis are people that I know in real life, that I've pulled out of 5e games or introduced to role playing entirely, that now they swear by it. They've went out and bought their own source books. Some of them are running their own games. And, I know that these games are games that people will like, but there is this whole cultural aspect to it that's really kind of hard to overcome, which is again, like I said, why I don't love the OSR label anymore. And this has been something I've really been thinking about the last probably 6 months mostly. I mean, like Brendan said, some of my handles are still Kelty OSR. I've really been coming to this conclusion very recently. But I think that, going back to OSR versus story games, I think that we just need to embrace the whole umbrella of indie games. These are indie games. There's different types. There's different cultural goals here. There's different feels to the games and different levels of crunchiness, but they're all indie games.
Well,
see that's what. Okay, hang on one second.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that kind of boggles me, because I actually, if I'm not mistaken, I had this conversation with my role-playing mentor, Mark Diaz Truman, and he, because I was throwing around the word indie game quite a lot, and he's like, yeah, but even the word indie game doesn't describe role-playing games. He goes, they're all indie games, right? And this was before, maybe it was right after. There's really two games out there that aren't indie games. There's Dungeons and Dragons, which is owned by Hasbro, and then there's fucking Vampire, which is owned by Modifius, right? Or the video game company. All the rest of them are basically just like little fucking people sitting at home, writing stuff up, doing the equivalent of almost like self-publishing. I mean, they're not owned by big publishing houses. They're not owned by conglomerates. They're not owned by corporations. The largest role-playing game companies are like small affairs compared to the movements of capital in America. Like, they're not even worth scooping up. Like, they're not even worth just buying so that you can buy their IPs. They've just always kind of been out there kind of treading water in the indie space. Like Steve Jackson Games. That's an indie game company. It's owned by Steve Jackson. You know what I'm saying, right?
I hear that, but I would say that it doesn't necessarily matter if we're saying that there's 5,000 indie games and 2 non, if 90% of people in gaming are playing those non-indie games. You know what I'm saying? I don't think it matters so much how many games are in each bucket, but how many players are in each bucket. Because I think once you pull somebody out of the mainstream 5th edition D&D, and into the indie space, that's when they start buying up a lot of things, experimenting with different types of rule sets. And obviously, I think that we need to develop some sort of vocabulary around the different mechanics and how they work. I think that, descriptions and putting ourselves into boxes is helpful at times, especially when you're marketing your game. But I think that narrative-based or story-based games is a tricky one, because ultimately, if you have mechanics and you have a role-playing game, then you have both in just different levels. And at that point, we're really talking about a slider bar here. What's the reliance on mechanics? What's the reliance on narrative? So my point is that I think that distinction is a lot less important than the distinction of what's the tone of your game. Is this a high fantasy kind of heroes overcoming evil game? Is this a gritty 90s vampires and werewolves game? Is, exactly what is the feel of this?
Richard, I cut you off for a second.
No, I was basically going to make the same point you were. Is like I was going to say that there's I would have said there's probably 4 or 5 non-indie games, but because I think Asmodee counts as a large conglomerate now because they basically own half the board game world, and they own Fantasy Flight and a bunch of other smaller companies. But
this is why Handers on Andrews McNeil.
Right. It's Overlight and not Kids on Bikes, but not Tales from the Loop. Anyway, there's a bunch of these games that are published by Asmodee through Fantasy Flight and a couple of Renegade Games and a couple other things that are but the point stands that there's almost no way that's not indie games. Now there is this kind of aesthetic that kind of comes with the story game people kind of started trying, they're trying to claim the marketing that is the indie record space, the kind of small publishing, and OSR definitely has that as well, but that's just kind of one of those things that they picked, right? It's just a marketing term.
Yeah,
really.
There's something going on there. There's something that I think you have a real point there about the aesthetics, because you get into the indie space, if we're going to call it that, and you see a lot of very kind of cute looking stuff. There's this kind of indie cute look, right? And then there's the OSR crowd that's like the chewing with your mouth full at the dinner table aesthetic, right? And then but
black t-shirt with stains all over it.
Yeah, but I think that the longer that these two conversations go on, the more we're going to see crossover between the two. I think we're going to start seeing cute OSR games, and I think we're going to start seeing real nasty story games. At least I hope we start seeing nasty story games, because I love nasty shit.
Well, you finish your game and then we'll see it. So
yeah, Richard, how are we doing on time, man? I got
we should probably wrap up. We're at hour 10 or so.
Okay. Well, I have one more question for the group, and then we'll wrap it up there. So, a lot of what I kind of keep hearing is that OSR means life is cheap, and story games means life is precious. What do we think about that?
I mean,
if we agree with that, what does it mean?
I think it's just who's in control of your character's life, like we were talking about earlier. In a lot of, if you look at how paper thin on mechanics a OSR character is, you can blow them over with a feather. It's very, very easy to get rid of them. And to that extent, the dichotomy stands, but it really all depends on who's in, but I could have my story game. And one of my favorite things about Fiasco is I often love killing my character in the first scene. I love to kill my character in the first scene. And that means that all scenes that I play from now on will be previous to that scene in Fiasco. So
this fucking guy, look at you, regular fucking Memento.
Well, yeah, I take my clues from a lot of movies. So kill the characters first, show the end, and then let's find out how we got there. And I think I think the perception is there for a reason, but I don't think it just depends on, in OSR, who's the game master and what their thoughts are on killing characters versus in story games where it's, I get to choose when I'm going to kill my character. So, I'm not going to kill my character because it's perfect. It's my little child. So
Darrell, what do you got, bro?
So I think I can sum it up this way, that based on our conversation today on those two sides of the same coin, OSR is play stupid games, win stupid prizes, whereas storytelling is play stupid games. Whee!
All right. Well,
that's solid. Can't argue with that.
What do you think, Spencer? What are your thoughts there?
So I'm glad I'm going last in this, because I think I've got a pretty long answer.
Lay it on me. What you got?
To start, I think that the dichotomy between life is fragile and life is precious, I don't think it's a dichotomy. I think that OSR games create tension and create emotional impact and investment in your character by how fragile they are. There's a balance there. If you make them too fragile and you're a really hard DM and you're killing characters left and right, nobody's going to make that connection. Nobody's going to get invested in their character. But if you balance it right, the very fact they could die at any moment makes it so tense. And on the other hand, story games make you invested in your character and make you believe your character is valuable by letting you fully shape what happens to them in the world that they live in. So it's basically two alternate versions. It's in getting invested by investing your energy into your character, or your energy into your character's actions and making sure that they're smart and they're engaging with the world in a way that is going to let them survive. I want to just say, something that I really tried to do in the Bleakness on Kickstarter now.
Plug. Always be plugging.
One thing I really tried to do in the Bleakness was really dive into that kind of relationship, that kind of OSR version of that. In my first drafts of the rules, I basically said that once you lose your character, that's it. You're done with the Bleakness. I eventually realized that was a little rough. Obviously you don't want to go to a game session and, it's a 3-hour game session. You die 20 minutes in. It's like, well, now I'm sitting here doing nothing. And kind of I came to a balance. I'm not going to spoil it, but basically the balance is that, to sum it up quickly, if the party dies, that's it. If the entire party dies, you never get to experience the Bleakness again as a player. Basically, you have the situation in the game, and I think this is really kind of goes back to my overall philosophy on how to run games, is that success is so far from guaranteed that you start to question what success is. What am I really trying to achieve here? The stated goal eventually isn't the goal anymore. The goal is to, whatever you want it to be, whatever comes through emerging narratives. Is the goal to survive to the next village? Is the goal to answer this question that I've had? Am I trying to figure out something about the world? Am I trying to figure out something about my character? Am I trying to, live up to some ideal? Through emerging storytelling, which is kind of a story game thing, you can really figure out what matters to you and create that emotional impact through the struggle of the world and the world not being your friend. Anyway, long way to answer that.
So, thank you so much for being on the show, Spencer. We really appreciate you coming on today, and thank you for participating in this conversation. I don't know that we answered anything for anybody. I don't know that I answered anything for myself, but I certainly, I certainly have some grist for the old mental mill. Spencer, before we go, just want to do one more real quick pitch for your game, and then tell everyone where they can find you, Kickstarter, Instagram, etc., if they're interested in following up in the work that you do.
Totally. So just to sum up, The Bleakness is a indie rules light horror game. It's got an extremely streamlined rule set that gets players in the game in 5 minutes. It uses statless, classless, and levelless mechanics. It's meant to be a short campaign, so it's perfect as a change of pace. You have your long-term 5e game, your long-term Call of Cthulhu game, whatever you're running. This is great if you want to break for 2 to 5 sessions to run something else. Everything that it needs in the book. It's got over 100 encounters, about 4 dungeons. It really is unique in the way that it's creating an atmospheric horror adventure, a little bit different than anyone else's. I think that a lot of horror games really fail at being horrific and actually scaring the players because they don't create enough emotional impact. They're not hitting the right notes, and I think the Bleakness does a really interesting job of that. So you can find it on Kickstarter right now. It's called The Bleakness. I'll make sure there's a link in the Discord and all that too, so you guys can find it there. I am on Facebook, Kelty OSR. I am on Instagram. Your best bet there is to go to my publishing company, Twisted Image Publishing, and my website, twistedimagepublishing.com as well.
And awesome. we'll have a link to the Bleakness in the show notes. I also wanted to, because we're in plugs, right? I want to plug go into fullmetalrpg.com and then go to our merch store right here. Put some merch in your life. And then you can show your old school, of course it's not, there we go. You can show your old school threads, because we have the old school logo that's a very cool old English style font on, and of course the only two choices for color are black and red. So you can get black with white on it, or you can get red with white on it. Those are the only two choices, and they're really cool. Show your old school style and get our old school logo t-shirt. So
I love it. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Full Metal RPG, and thank you so much to our cultists and to our patrons and to anyone who's taken a listen. If this is your first episode, or if you've been listening to us for a real long time, we really appreciate you. Please check out our Patreon, our Discord, and if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It does help people find us and give them the same access to this content that you got. All right. Well, thank you all once again. Have a good night.
Good night.